Good day. This is Dr. Jana Price-Sharps with Mind Pilot. Today we're going to talk about what happens when you have been under a lot of stress and then you start to come down from that. Maybe you've been in the field for a long time, you've been out on a special assignment, or you've been working day-to-day order backs, and now you're exhausted, you have a lot of adrenaline in your system. How can that impact that transition home? So today I have a very common guest and frequent guest on Mind Pilot, Dr. Matthew Sharps, and we are going to talk about the cognitive principles, and then I'm going to give you a few thoughts and techniques that you can use once you're coming off that line. So we've talked a lot on Mind Pilot about the Yerkes-Dodson curve and high arousal and when people get very adrenalized and how that begins to impact decision-making and thought processes. What happens when they've had a lot of high adrenaline in their system, high adrenaline and cortisol, and now they come home and the adrenaline drops off?
Yeah, well, it's going to take a while to come back to what were the pre-stress levels. Okay? The fight or flight response is what we're talking about here, that adrenergic response. And the reason it's there at all is to allow you to have the higher performance functioning you need in the field. Now, one of the consequences of that is reduced flow of resources to the prefrontal cortex, which are your centers of judgment, your centers of being able to suppress inappropriate behaviors and so on and so forth. Well, the point is that you come out of the field, and these processes are in fact chemical. You're dealing with the chemistry of the body and with a concept called homeostasis. Now, homeostasis means you're maintaining a steady state, right? If you've just eaten a very large dinner, you don't eat anything more. And if you haven't eaten for a week, you're probably going to want to eat, okay? So you want to maintain a state of a certain amount of food energy, a certain amount of water in your system, so on and so forth. And the body does this primarily through the structure of the hypothalamus, which keeps you in a steady state. Now, the point of that is the steady state for a combat situation, whether you're combating, if you're a police officer, you're a firefighter, you're an individual in the military services, that steady state for combat has to be significantly higher in terms of heart rate, in terms of breathing rate, all these other factors when you're actually in the fight, if it's against humans, against fire, whatever you're dealing with. Or ambulance and hospital personnel, you work a night shift in the emergency room, the ambulances are coming in again and again. You get into that same state. You're not fighting or running away from anybody, but you're in the fight or flight state. Now, coming out of that is a chemical process, so it takes a while to get back to normal. Now, how long that'll be depends on a whole variety of factors. How much stress there was, how long that stress happened, and a variety of individual differences. Okay, people who are working undercover in law enforcement for long periods, it often takes them quite a while, quite a long period, to return to normal. And this has been seen many times, where an undercover operator will come back to the world, to their family, to their department, whatever level of law enforcement that is, and suddenly they'll erupt. They'll go back into their affected persona, the way they behaved in the field. They'll use the wrong language. They'll be overly aggressive, et cetera, with family members or with coworkers, with superiors. What's happening there is that there's a momentary shift back to the homeostasis of the field. So it takes quite a while to get back to the homeostatic level that you were at before.
That makes sense. One of the things I've seen clinically is when people have been under a lot of pressure for a long period of time, and the pressure is suddenly off, whatever that means, meaning they're home, they're safe, whatever, they will often dip into what looks like a depression, where suddenly they want to be left alone, they're isolating, they don't want to do any activities with the family, they're irritable. And, I read a lot about adrenal fatigue and how the adrenals are affected by long periods of high stress. And so one of the things that it says in that literature is that it can mimic depression. And And so that is part of this chemical rebalance that you're talking about, the change in homeostasis?
Yeah, that makes a tremendous amount of sense because, in a way, there are two very interconnected things going on here. Now, one is the chemistry of the body moving from that highly adrenergic state to your previous, more normal state. There's a homeostatic resistance to that that's going on at a chemical level. But the other level, this is when you see more. Obviously, you're not watching. You don't have some sort of serotonin meter going on that you're watching. The other level is behavioral and cognitive. So you start to feel these physical changes where they'll be irritating. Okay, you're used to looking for danger everywhere. Well, now you're still looking for danger, but it isn't there. Now it isn't there. That's good that it isn't there, but it's kind of irritating that you're now in this situation where your former behaviors aren't working. So one good way of dealing with that might be to kind of get the hell away from your family. Why are these people irritating me this much? Well, they're not. What's irritating you is this complete shift in the homeostatic needs you're surrounded by, and your need cognitively to adjust your thinking and memory, and then your emotions, okay, which have a huge cognitive component to this situation, which formerly was your normal world, but now is this weird kind of fragment. When I've talked to people who've been undercover for a while, or people who've been on the line for a long time in the fire service, there'll be a sort of sense of a fragmentation, that things just don't seem right. They're not flowing smoothly. People come to you with unexpected demands that really aren't that important in your mind. Well, you were dealing with life and death. And now you're dealing with, the terrific importance of, think of any household thing. You've got to pick new furniture, you've got to go to the kids' school play or something. Well, the consequence, people are treating that as if it were as consequential as life and death in your mind. And that's irritating. It's like nobody understands me, okay? And gradually, again, going back to undercover work, I know with my colleague Devin Kowalczyk some years ago, we published a paper on best practices for undercover recovery. People will more or less start viewing the undercover experience as this central facet. And once you start doing that, you start going, well, no one can ever understand me again. Now, human beings are social creatures. That's very, I won't say frightening, but it's a very uncomfortable concept. And my gosh, here I am isolated, having had this extremely special experience that's extremely important, but nobody will ever understand me again, and I don't know what to do with my life, and things start to become more fragmented. And they're not really fragmented. The chemistry of the body is producing a cognitive assessment that is not really appropriate to either situation, to the stress of the field or to the admittedly lowered stress of normal life. And that adjustment ultimately, it's related directly to the chemical factors in homeostasis, but ultimately it's going to manifest more as a cognitive reality in your thinking and your memory, and the consequent emotions.
I have seen this over the 24 years that I have done this job. I have repeatedly heard guys and gals that have been out on the line for quite a while, or undercover for a while, or deployed for a while, and they start talking about wanting to go back out, even though they were miserable out there maybe, or it was hard out there, or their lives were in danger out there. But it goes back to what you were just saying. It feels normal. It feels like that's where they're supposed to be because other people get what they're going through. And so when they come home, the people at home don't get them. And that is a real source of stress. One of the biggest complaints, and you brought it up, is, my family is treating this as it's a serious issue when I just saw really horrible things wherever I was at. This isn't a crisis. They don't understand what a real crisis is. And so helping their mind to transform into basically civilian mode when they're at home, and understand that maybe for their family it does feel like a crisis.
Yeah, that's crucially important, I think. I remember many years ago, a colleague was terribly upset. It was like she'd lost somebody because the painters had done the interior of her house in the wrong shade of beige, and she was just incredibly angry and upset about that. And I was thinking to myself, oh my goodness, compared to things in real life, this is not all that critical. Well, now, you see the point here. For this lady, their life was not particularly stressful, my God, they got not even the wrong color. It wasn't blue instead of red. It was the wrong shade of beige. Frankly, personally, I'm not even sure how you can get a shade of beige. I have no idea. But to my mind, that is completely inconsequential. But to her mind, it was essentially producing, maybe going a little out on a limb here, but essentially producing a life or death series of consequences in her mind. Now, the genuine stresses of real life, your kids are in trouble or you do have various problems with your house, whatever else. No, that kind of pales into insignificance compared to people shooting at you with cannons. But in their minds, that's this huge deal. And it might have been a huge deal to you before people were shooting at you with cannons. The point being, no, you're not going to feel like you belong in this world. And you might start thinking, my God, I belong back in the field. Now, the irony is that back in the field, you were probably thinking, my God, I belong at home. Now, the human mind is very uncomfortable with ideas that are that innately contradictory. And so you start seeing the world in a more fragmented manner. Exactly, where should I be? Yeah, I should be back in the field. Back in the field, we had a code of honor. People often retreat into what I've referred to as gestalt processing. Okay, if you start dissecting the concept of in the field we had a code of honor, well, you may find an awful lot of flaws, of logical flaws in what you're saying. But you're not looking for those flaws. And we've talked again about the Yerkes-Dodson curve, which admittedly there are a variety of problems with the Yerkes-Dodson curve. There are a variety of manifestations of real-world stress behavior that don't exactly follow it. But in broad general terms, no, when you're under stress, you're not doing the kind of feature-intensive, item-by-item thought that you are when you're not under stress, all right? I mean, if you're hunting a buffalo with a spear or something, or people are shooting at you with cannons, that's not a moment when you're going to be solving quadratic equations. So you don't start thinking about, well, my goodness, I'm being attacked by a buffalo. Well, I wonder what buffalo really that related to cattle. You don't think in those terms. You think, get the hell out of the way of the buffalo, or possibly shoot it, depending what's going on. Now, the point being there, that you're not really evaluating the reality that you're in currently, or your memories of the reality of the field at that moment. The one may seem very attractive to you when in fact it really wasn't. The other may seem very repulsive to you when in fact the repulsion is not based on the real features of this situation. It's based on your reaction to those features. In other words, you're not basing this on the fact, you're not basing your reaction on the fact that your husband or wife is saying it's the wrong shade of beige. You're basing that on a comparison. This gets a little complex. A comparison with the way you think things should be, based on really a concept of how things should be that isn't exactly right for the field and it isn't exactly right for here. That's where we get the fragmentation. And it's difficult even to articulate, but it is this kind of complexity that has to be dealt with.
And part of that, it's important to think about in some ways, the same process is happening with your family, because especially if you've been gone for quite a while, you've been working a lot of hours, even if you're coming home every day, but you're working back to back to back, they're not seeing you. They're not interacting with you. If you've been deployed or if you've been out in the field for long periods of time, suddenly you come back and it's like you're a stranger in your own household. And so suddenly maybe you're trying to parent your kids and your kids are looking at you like, where have you been? You're not my parent. I have to ask mom, or dad or whatever the case may be. And that can be very unsettling and contribute to this feeling like, I guess I need to just go back to work. So the more you're aware of all of this, it doesn't mean that this is not possible. What it does mean is you need to be aware of it. And you need to make a plan to transition. And your family also needs to be aware if you're exhausted, it's going to take you some time to recalibrate. Your brain just doesn't turn on and off. I wish it did, but it doesn't. And so being aware of, okay, if you're going on several days off, that first day off, you may be kind of MIA. You may be sitting on the couch watching TV, sleeping a lot. That's okay. And you need to explain it to your family of what's going on with you. Because what I often see is the family is unaware of what you've been going through. And many of you tell me, well, I don't take it home. Well, yeah, you do, because you have the same brain. So they need to understand the gist of what's been going on so that they understand that you need a day to completely recalibrate. And you may not recalibrate in that day. It may take 4 or 5 days. And by that time, you may be back to work. But at least one day of just allowing your system to cool off so that you can re-engage with your family. And that's an important concept that the family needs to understand. It's an important concept that you need to understand. And I can tell you this, it will make your home life a whole lot better if you have a plan before you go home. Always have a plan. So I hope this is helpful. I hope you subscribe to our podcast. Thank you for joining us today. This is Dr. Jana Price-Sharps with Mind Pilot.